When we cast our gaze back to the cradle of Western civilization, one figure stands colossal above the rest, etched into the collective consciousness of humanity with the permanence of marble and the ferocity of a storm. He is the King of Gods, the Cloud Gatherer, the wielder of the thunderbolt that splits the heavens and shakes the foundations of the earth. To the casual observer, Zeus is the ultimate patriarch, a symbol of law, order, and justice, sitting regally upon the golden throne of Mount Olympus. We see him in museums as the bearded sage, the majestic ruler who brought civilization to a chaotic universe, enforcing the sacred laws of hospitality and governance that would shape empires for millennia. But the polished stone of ancient statues betrays a far darker, more visceral truth that has been sanitized by time and simplified by modern adaptations. Peel back the layers of reverence, and you will find a deity whose rise to power was not a destined coronation, but a brutal, bloody coup born from the darkest recesses of familial trauma. The story in Zeus is not merely a tale of divine administration. It is a horrific saga of intergenerational violence, a cosmic cycle of sons murdering fathers, of cannibalism, of castration, and of a paranoia so deep it threatened to consume reality itself. Before he was the king, he was a refugee, hidden away in a damp cave to escape the insatiable hunger of a father who devoured his own children whole. His path to the throne was paved with the broken bodies of titans and cemented by a ruthless pragmatism that saw him turn against allies and enemies alike to secure his absolute dominion. To understand Zeus is to understand the terrifying dual nature of existence itself. He is the provider of life-giving rain, yet the hurler of destructive lightning. He is the protector of the weak, yet a serial predator whose lusts knew no bounds, leaving a trail of tragic victims and heroic bastards across the ancient world. How does a god embody the pinnacle of justice while simultaneously acting as the cosmos's most prolific tyrant? We are about to embark on a journey into the heart of Greek mythology, stripping away the Disney-fied veneer to reveal the raw, elemental power of the original texts, from Hesiod's Theogony to the tragedies of Aeschylus. We will witness the titanomachy that shattered the universe, the earth-shaking duel with the monster Typhon, and the complex psychological machinery of a god who feared above all else that history would repeat itself. This is the definitive biography of the Olympian's complex patriarch, a deep dive into the blood, the glory, and the madness that forged the ancient world. We are descending into the age of myths, where the whims of a single deity could drown the world or elevate a mortal to the stars. But before we climb the treacherous slopes of Mount Olympus to witness the rise of the Thunder King, make sure you summon the power of the lightning bolt on that subscribe button and ring the bell, ensuring you don't miss a single chapter of our mythological deep dives.
To comprehend the psychological architecture of Zeus, one must first excavate the bloody foundations upon which his throne was built. The story does not begin with the lightning bolt, but with the sickle of adamant. It begins not on the snowy peaks of Olympus, but in the suffocating darkness of a cosmic dysfunctional family that predates the concept of morality itself. In the beginning, there was the primal union of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky, a suffocating embrace where the sky laid heavy upon the earth, refusing to allow their children, the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Hecatonchires, to see the light of day. It was a regime of absolute suppression, a father crushing the potential of his offspring out of fear and disgust. This cycle of repression was only shattered when the youngest Titan, Cronus, guided by his mother's vengeance and armed with a jagged flint sickle, castrated his father Uranus. The act separated the sky from the earth, ushering in a new age, but as the blood of the primal father soaked the earth, birthing the Furies and the giants, Uranus gasped out a final venomous prophecy. Just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would Cronus be overthrown by one of his own children. That curse, whispered by a dying universe, festered in the mind of Cronus like a malignant tumor, though he took his sister Rhea as his queen and presided over what Hesiotic tradition calls the Golden Age of man, a time without law, labor, or pain. His internal world was a landscape of paranoia and terror. He had liberated his siblings from the earth, but he imprisoned his own children in a far more grotesque dungeon, his own stomach. As Rhea gave birth to the first generation of Olympians, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, Cronus did not gaze upon them with paternal love. He saw them only as the architects of his demise. In a display of preemptive brutality that haunts the mythology, he snatched each newborn from Rhea's arms and swallowed him whole. He did not kill them. They were immortal gods, undying and eternal. Instead, they were trapped in the acid-drenched darkness of their father's belly, living, conscious, and growing in hatred, a sentient burden that Cronus carried with him as a testament to his desperate attempt to cheat fate. Rhea, the mother goddess, was driven to the brink of madness by this systematic consumption of her progeny. Her grief hardened into a cold, diamond-sharp resolve, mirroring the very rebellion Gaia had instigated a generation prior. When she became pregnant with her sixth child, Zeus, she refused to allow the cycle to claim him. Fleeing the Titan's palace on Mount Othrys, she retreated to the rugged, untamed island of Crete, a place of wild magic and ancient power. There, in the deep recesses of a cave on Mount Dicte, or perhaps Mount Ida, as traditions vary, she squatted in the shadows and birthed the future king of gods. But the deception that followed was the true masterstroke of this rebellion. Rhea took a large stone, the omphalos, wrapped it meticulously in swaddling cloths to mimic the weight and warmth of an infant, and presented it to her husband. Cronus, blinded by his own paranoia and arrogant in his belief that he had mastered the future, did not even check the bundle. He seized it and swallowed it in a single gulp, forcing the stone down to join his 5 captive children, believing he had finally secured his eternal reign.
Zeus was left behind on Crete, a godchild orphaned by necessity, raised not by divine parents, but by the raw forces of nature itself. This period of hiding was crucial, for it forged his character away from the decadent courts of the Titans. He was nursed by the goat nymph Amalthea, whose milk gave him strength, and fed honey by the sacred bees of the mountain. But his survival required more than sustenance. It required silence, a commodity impossible to guarantee with a crying infant. To mask the wails of the young god, Rhea stationed a group of armored dancers and warriors known as the Curetes outside the cave. Whenever the baby Zeus cried, these warriors would perform a frenzied, violent dance, clashing their spears against their bronze shields, creating a cacophony of metal and shouting that drowned out the sounds of the infant. Thus, Zeus's very lullaby was the sound of war. His first sensory memories were the clash of weapons and the rhythm of martial violence. Growing up in the shadows of the Dictaean cave, Zeus was not merely a passive survivor. He was an observer of the natural order and a student of his grandmother, Gaia. He learned that power was not static but fluid, and that intelligence could overcome brute force.
As he matured from a vulnerable infant into a deity of immense physical and metaphysical power, the prophecy of Uranus hung over the world like a storm cloud waiting to break. The young god knew that his existence was an anomaly, a glitch in Cronus's design, and that his destiny was inextricably linked to the liberation of his siblings, who were still languishing in the living prison of their father's gut. The stage was set not just for a family reunion, but for a cosmic revolution. However, Zeus did not simply march up to Mount Othrys and challenge his father to single combat. Such an act would have been suicide against a Titan in his prime. To breach the defenses of the old order, he found his greatest weapon not in a thunderbolt, which he did not yet possess, but in the mind of Metis, a daughter of the ocean. Metis, whose name literally translates to wisdom or cunning, became the true architect of the Olympian revolution. She understood that brute force could not undo a king built on treachery. Only a smarter treachery could prevail. It was Metis who crafted the plan of infiltration, urging Zeus to shed his divine aura and disguise himself as a humble cupbearer, a role that allowed him to slip unnoticed into the decadent halls of his father's palace. This was the first manifestation of Zeus's strategic brilliance, the willingness to humble himself to achieve supreme power.
The atmosphere within the Titan's palace on Mount Othrys was a stagnant excess. Cronus, lulled into a false sense of security by the consumption of the stone, presided over a court that believed itself invincible. He had grown complacent, bloated on the arrogance of absolute rule, unaware that the servant pouring his nectar was the very doom he had tried to swallow decades prior. The tension of this moment is palpable, a son serving his father, the murderer of his siblings, waiting for the precise moment to strike. The weapon was not a sword, but a mixture of mustard and salt, prepared by Metis, a powerful emetic designed to violently purge the stomach. When Zeus handed the golden goblet to Cronus, he was offering a chalice of judgment. As the Titan drank deep, expecting the sweet intoxication of nectar, he was instead seized by a convulsion that rocked the foundations of the mountain. The regurgitation of the Olympian gods is one of the most visceral and horrifying scenes in all of mythology, a biological reversal of the birthing process. Cronus did not merely vomit, he expelled divinity. First came the stone, the omphalos, crashing onto the marble floor, a heavy, mocking symbol of his foolishness. Then, one by one, covered in the bile of ages, but unharmed by the acidic environment of a Titan's gut, the siblings emerged: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Because they had been swallowed in reverse order of their birth and now regurgitated, the order of seniority was mystically inverted. Zeus, once the youngest, was now the leader, the first among them by virtue of his freedom. The reunion was not filled with tearful embraces, but with the grim realization of the war to come. These siblings, fully grown and burning with the trauma of their imprisonment, looked upon their savior brother and their weakened father, and the lines of battle were instantly drawn. This event marked the definitive end of the Golden Age. The expulsion of the gods shattered the cosmic silence. Cronus, weakened and humiliated, rallied his Titan brethren, Oceanus, Hyperion, Iapetus, and others, calling upon the ancient loyalties of the old order. Meanwhile, Zeus and his siblings retreated to the dizzying heights of Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, a fortress of snow and stone that would become their base of operations. The universe was now polarized. On one side stood Othrys, representing the heavy, crushing permanence of the past. On the other stood Olympus, representing the dynamic, chaotic potential of the future. The psychological landscape had shifted irrevocably. The sons had not just rebelled, they had survived the worst the father could do. This survival emboldened them, transforming a family dispute into a cataclysmic civil war that would threaten to unravel the very fabric of reality, the Titanomachy.
The conflict that erupted following the purge of Cronus was not merely a dynastic struggle, it was a cataclysmic event that threatened to unmake the very fabric of the physical world. This was the Titanomachy, a 10-year war, or perhaps 10 great years, a unit of cosmic time incomprehensible to mortals, where the forces of the old order clashed with the energies of the new. From the jagged peaks of Mount Othrys, the Titans, led by the brooding and desperate Cronus, hurled the sheer weight of the earth itself. Opposing them from the snow-capped fortress of Mount Olympus stood Zeus and his siblings, wielding their youthful vitality and divine wrath. Yet, despite their fury, the war devolved into a grinding, terrifying stalemate. For a decade, the cosmos trembled, the earth was scorched, the seas boiled, and the sky was choked with the dust of shattered mountains, yet neither side could claim a decisive victory. The Titans, possessing raw, elemental strength and the experience of eons, were immovable objects. The Olympians, though dynamic and fierce, lacked the weaponry to breach the Titan defenses. The universe held its breath, locked in a violent equilibrium that seemed destined to last for eternity. Zeus, however, possessed a quality that his father lacked, the capacity to listen and the foresight to seek alliances in the most unlikely of places. It was Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, always shifting her allegiances to ensure the cycle of life continued, who whispered a prophecy to the young king. She revealed that victory would not be won by Olympian hands alone, but by those whom Cronus had wronged and discarded. Deep within the bowels of the earth lay Tartarus, a sunless abyss so remote that a bronze anvil falling from heaven would take 9 days and nights to reach the earth, and 9 more to reach its depths. Here, in this cosmic dungeon, Cronus had imprisoned his own brothers, the Cyclopes, the one-eyed master smiths, and the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, monstrosities of 50 heads and 100 arms. They were the forgotten victims of the Titans' tyranny, banished because their chaotic forms offended Cronus's desire for perfection. Zeus understood that to defeat a tyrant, he must become a liberator. Leaving the front lines of the war, Zeus undertook a perilous descent into the gloom of the underworld. There, he confronted the jailer of Tartarus, the Dracana Campe, a monstrous she-dragon with the tail of a scorpion and snakes writhing around her legs. In a display of prowess that foreshadowed his future dominance, Zeus slew the beast, unlocking the adamant gates and releasing his grotesque uncles from their eons-long captivity. He did not recoil from their monstrous appearances as his father had. Instead, he offered them nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods, restoring their vitality and, more importantly, their dignity. In exchange for their freedom, the Cyclopes, Brontes, Thunder, Steropes, Lightning, and Argus, Bright, pledged their eternal loyalty and their unrivaled craftsmanship to the Olympian cause. It was here, in the fires of the underworld, or perhaps the volcanic vents of Etna, that the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The Cyclopes were not warriors, they were engineers of the divine. For Hades, the eldest brother, they forged the Helm of Darkness, a terrifying artifact that rendered its wearer not just invisible, but imperceptible to all senses, a weapon of absolute stealth. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, a three-pronged spear capable of shattering rocks and summoning earthquakes, giving him dominion over the tectonic fury of the earth and sea. And for Zeus, they forged the ultimate weapon, a masterpiece of destruction that would become his icon, the thunderbolt. This was not merely a weapon of fire, it was condensed plasma, a channeling of the cosmic electrical force that could scorch the earth and challenge the very immortality of the Titans. Armed with these gifts of high technology, the Olympians returned to the surface, ready to break the deadlock.
The final assault was a coordinated masterpiece of shock and awe. Hades, donning his helm of darkness, infiltrated the Titan stronghold unseen, stealing their weapons and sowing panic within their ranks before the first blow was struck. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, shaking the foundations of Mount Othrys and destabilizing the Titan's footing. And then Zeus unleashed the fury of the heavens. For the first time, the sky did not just rumble, it screamed. Lightning bolt after lightning bolt rained down upon the Titans with the precision of arrows and the yield of nuclear fire. The forests caught fire, the oceans sizzled and steamed, and the very air burned with the smell of ozone and sulfur. Hesiod describes the heat as so intense that it melted the earth like tin in a crucible. The Titans, blinded by the searing light and deafened by the rolling thunder, were disoriented, their brute strength useless against this aerial bombardment. But the coup de grace was delivered by the Hecaton chairs, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. These living siege engines marched to the front lines, and with their 300 combined arms, they unleashed a barrage of boulders that blotted out the sun. Imagine the kinetic energy of 300 mountains being hurled simultaneously, again and again, in a rhythmic devastation that buried the Titans under a tomb of rock. It was a sensory overload, a machine gun effect of stone and fury that broke the Titans' morale. The sheer scale of the violence was such that the sky and earth seemed to merge in a chaotic haze of dust and fire. The Titans, once the proud rulers of the cosmos, were beaten into submission not just by superior strength, but by a superior strategy that utilized every aspect of warfare: stealth, technology, and overwhelming firepower. The aftermath of the Titanomachy established the new geopolitical reality of the mythic world. The defeated Titans, including Cronus, who had once thought himself the master of time, were bound in chains and cast down into the very prison they had once utilized, Tartarus. In a supreme irony, the Hecaton chairs, once the prisoners, volunteered to become the jailers, ensuring that the old order would never rise again. Atlas, the Titan general who had led the armies in Cronus' stead, was given a special punishment. He was tasked with holding up the celestial sphere, bearing the weight of the sky on his shoulders for eternity, a living pillar separating the heavens from the earth to prevent them from ever embracing to birth new monsters. Zeus had won. The war was over. But as the smoke cleared over the scarred battlefield of the world, a new challenge arose. Winning a war is one thing, ruling a universe is another. The king of gods had secured his throne, but he had also incurred the wrath of the one entity older and more powerful than even the Titans, Gaia herself. Victory in the Titanomachy brought silence, but it did not bring peace. In the ancient world, power abhorred a vacuum, and the imprisonment of the Titans in the gloom of Tartarus sent shockwaves through the divine family tree that would trigger a retaliation more terrifying than any war of armies. Zeus had secured the heavens, but he had neglected the earth, specifically the will of his grandmother, Gaia.
Gaia was the primordial mother of all, a deity whose loyalty lay not with any specific regime, but with her children. She had aided Zeus in overthrowing Cronus because Cronus had imprisoned her offspring. Now, seeing Zeus do the exact same thing to the Titans, her ancient benevolence curdled into a bitter, molten rage. The King of Olympus had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed the earth was merely a stage for his rule, forgetting that the stage itself was alive, sentient, and capable of birthing nightmares designed specifically to hunt gods. The first wave of Gaia's vengeance came in the form of the Gigantes, the giants. Born from the blood of the castrated Uranus that had soaked into the earth eons ago, these were not merely large men, they were chthonic insurgencies made flesh. With legs of coiling serpents and hair of matted flames, they laid siege to Olympus, piling mountain upon mountain, Pelion upon Ossa, in a desperate attempt to scale the heavens. This conflict, the Gigantomachy, tested the martial cohesion of the new Olympian order. It was a brutal reminder that the sky could not ignore the earth. While this war was desperate and bloody, necessitating the help of a mortal hero, a prophecy that would later involve Heracles, it was ultimately a prelude, a testing ground for the true horror that Gaia was gestating in the dark, wet caverns of Cilicia. Realizing that armies could not defeat Zeus, Gaia decided to birth a single entity that equaled the power of the entire Olympian pantheon combined. She lay with Tartarus, the living embodiment of the pit, and produced her last and most terrible child, Typhon.
Typhon was not a god. He was a biological cataclysm, a manifestation of the anti-cosmos. The ancient poets struggled to describe him, their language breaking down under the weight of his monstrosity. Hesiod and Apollodorus describe him as a creature of such colossal scale that his head brushed the stars, his vast wings blocking out the sun and casting the world into an unnatural twilight. From his shoulders sprang 100 snake heads, each one emitting a different, discordant sound. The roar of a lion, the hiss of a viper, the bellow of a bull, and the voice of a god, creating a cacophony that drove mortals to madness. His eyes flashed with fire that could melt rock, and from his thighs down he was a mass of writhing vipers. Typhon was the personification of the volcanic storm, the chaotic fury of nature that refuses to be tamed by the order of civilization. When this abomination marched upon Olympus, the reaction of the gods was not one of heroic defiance, but of abject terror. In a moment that underscores the sheer scale of the threat, most of the Olympians, the very deities who had stood firm against the Titans, fled. They ran to Egypt, disguising themselves as animals to escape Typhon's gaze. Apollo became a hawk, Eris an ibis, Ares a fish. Only Zeus stood his ground. This is the defining moment of his kingship. It was not his birthright or his lightning bolt that made him king. It was this solitary decision to stand firm against the apocalypse when all others had abandoned the line. The duel between Zeus and Typhon was a battle of cosmic attrition that shattered the geography of the ancient world. It began as an aerial bombardment, with Zeus raining thunderbolts from his chariot, while Typhon hurled entire mountains in return. But the monster was relentless, closing the distance to engage the Skyfather in hand-to-hand combat on Mount Cassius in Syria. Here, the narrative takes a dark and gruesome turn, emphasizing Zeus's vulnerability.
Typhon, using his immense strength, managed to wrestle the thunderbolt from Zeus's grip. Overpowering the god, the monster used a sickle, echoing the castration of Uranus, to slice the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet.
Zeus, the king of gods, was rendered a helpless, crippled husk. Typhon did not kill him, he wanted to humiliate him. He carried the limp body of Zeus to the Corycian cave in Cilicia, hiding the severed sinews in a bearskin rug guarded by a dragon, intending to let the god rot in powerless agony while he dismantled the cosmos. This was the nadir of the Olympian order, the moment where order was defeated by chaos. However, Zeus's rule was built on alliances, and it was those alliances that saved him. Hermes, the god of thieves and trickery, along with the goat pan Aegipon, infiltrated the cave. Using stealth and guile rather than force, they stole back the sinews and surgically reattached them to their master. The moment Zeus's strength returned, the atmosphere of the world shifted. The second round of the battle was not a contest, it was an execution. Reinvigorated and fueled by a cold divine fury, Zeus pursued the injured Typhon across the globe. The chase was relentless. On Mount Nysa, the Moirai, Fates, tricked Typhon into eating ephemeral fruits, promising him strength, but actually sealing his doom. A subtle reminder that even monsters are subject to destiny. The climax occurred over the island of Sicily. As Typhon prepared to hurl Mount Etna at the pursuing god, Zeus unleashed a concentrated barrage of lightning of such intensity that it struck the mountain while Typhon was still beneath it. The sheer force pinned the monster under the massive rock formation, burying him alive. Typhon was not dead, he could not die, but he was imprisoned for eternity. To the ancient Greeks, this was not just a story, it was a geological explanation. The smoke and lava erupting from Mount Etna were the breath and blood of Typhon, struggling against his prison. The earthquakes were his thrashing against the weight of Zeus's victory. With Typhon defeated, the supremacy of Zeus was absolute. He had faced the worst the universe could throw at him, the crushing weight of the past, Titans, and the chaotic fury of the present, Typhon, and he had triumphed. The other gods returned from Egypt, their shame overshadowed by their relief, and formally elected Zeus as their permanent king. He was no longer just a rebel leader or a war chieftain. He was now the Basileos, the undisputed sovereign of the cosmos. But as the dust settled and the new order began to build its laws, Zeus looked inward. He realized that external threats were manageable with lightning, but internal threats, threats to his succession, required a different, more insidious approach. The warrior was about to become the politician, and his first act of diplomacy would be the most personal betrayal of all. With the smoke of the Titanomachy clearing and the corpse of Typhon buried beneath the earth, the cosmos stood at a precipice. The question was no longer who possessed the strength to rule, but whether the new ruler possessed the wisdom to govern. Violence had won the throne, but history, specifically the bloody history of Uranus and Cronus, had taught Zeus that violence alone could not hold it. To break the cycle of parricide and usurpation that had plagued his lineage, Zeus had to evolve. He had to transform from a warlord into an administrator, from a conqueror into an institution. The first act of this new administration was the Great Division, a moment of cosmic politicking that defined the spheres of influence for the three male siblings who had survived the purge. In a scene that strikes a stark contrast to the epic battles preceding it, Homer describes the division of the world not as a coronation, but as a lottery, a game of chance played in a helmet. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades cast lots to determine their domains. The result established the geopolitical structure of the mythology. Zeus won the sky, granting him dominion over the weather, the clouds, and the high ground of governance. Poseidon was allotted the gray, turbulent seas, a realm as moody and violent as his own temperament. And Hades, drawing the shortest straw, or perhaps the most lucrative one, depending on one's perspective, received the underworld, the realm of the dead in the hidden riches of the earth. The surface of the earth itself, along with the heights of Mount Olympus, was declared neutral ground, a shared territory where their interests would intersect and collide. This partition prevented absolute tyranny by a single brother, while establishing a hierarchy where Zeus, as the first among equals and the wielder of the thunderbolt, held the ultimate veto power.
However, Zeus knew that external division was meaningless if an internal threat still existed. The prophecy that had driven Cronus to madness, that a son would surpass the father, still loomed over Zeus. His first wife was Metis, the very Titaness of wisdom who had helped him poison Cronus. When Metis became pregnant, Gaia whispered the old curse again. The first child would be a daughter of wisdom, but the second would be a son who would overthrow Zeus. Faced with the extinction of his reign, Zeus enacted a solution that was as grotesque as it was brilliant. He did not replicate his father's mistake of swallowing the children, which only preserved them. Instead, he tricked Metis into transforming, some myths say, into a fly or a drop of water, and swallowed her. This act was the turning point of Greek theology. By consuming Metis, Zeus did not just eliminate a threat, he assimilated her essence. He internalized wisdom. No longer was he merely a god of force, he was now a god of cunning, strategy, and intellect. He became pregnant with his own child, eventually birthing Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare and wisdom, who sprang fully armored from his forehead. Because she had no mother to incite rebellion and was born of Zeus alone, she remained his most loyal lieutenant. By this single, terrifying act of cannibalistic integration, Zeus permanently broke the cycle of succession. There would be no son to overthrow him, because he had become the synthesis of power and wisdom. He was now the permanent king. With his throne secured against internal and external threats, Zeus turned his gaze outward to humanity. He assumed a new title, Zeus Polyeius, the city keeper. He realized that for civilization to flourish, it needed more than walls and armies. It needed a moral code that transcended borders. He married Themis, the Titaness of divine law, and fathered the Horai, the seasons, and Dike, justice. This union symbolized that the natural order of the world and the moral order of society were inextricably linked. If a king ruled unjustly, crops would fail. If laws were broken, the seasons would turn chaotic. The crown jewel of this new moral order was the concept of xenia, guest friendship. In the Bronze Age world, where travel was perilous and no international police force existed, a stranger arriving at a foreign city was entirely vulnerable. Zeus instituted the sacred law that all guests must be treated with respect, fed and protected, and in turn, guests must not harm their hosts. He became Zeus Xenios, the protector of strangers and beggars. To violate xenia, to murder a guest or rob a host, was not just a crime, it was a blasphemy against Zeus himself.
This was not merely etiquette, it was a survival mechanism for humanity, a divine mandate that allowed for trade, diplomacy, and the exchange of ideas in a hostile world. When we read the Odyssey, the suitors are not just annoying, they are villains worthy of death because they violate the laws of Zeus Sinios by eating Odysseus's food and disrespecting his household. Yet, for all his power, there remained one force that even Zeus had to negotiate with, the Moirai, the Fates. Clotho spun the thread of life, Lysichasis measured it, and Atropos cut it. The relationship between Zeus and fate is the great theological tension of Greek mythology. Was Zeus their master, or was he bound by their decrees? In the Iliad, we see Zeus holding the golden scales, weighing the destinies of heroes like Hector and Achilles. There are moments of genuine pathos where Zeus wishes to save his own mortal son Sarpedon from death, but is reminded by Hera that to break the weave of fate would be to unravel the universe. Ultimately, Zeus acts not as the writer of fate, but as its enforcer. He ensures that what must happen does happen, subordinating his personal desires to the cosmic necessity. This discipline, this adherence to the big picture, even at the cost of his own heart, is what separates Zeus the king from Zeus the individual. He had established the laws of the universe, divided the realms, and integrated wisdom into his very being. The order of Olympus was absolute, but while his public administration was a masterpiece of stability, his private life was a chaotic storm of lust, jealousy, and deception. The god who brought law to the world was about to break every marital vow in the book, setting the stage for some of the most famous and tragic stories in human history. To view the myriad affairs of Zeus merely as indiscretions of a lustful deity is to misunderstand the fundamental nature of ancient theology. In the Greek worldview, Zeus was the generator of life, the rain that impregnates the earth, the unstoppable vital force that ensures the continuity of existence. However, when this metaphysical concept is personified into a narrative character, it creates a figure of terrifying predatory appetite. Zeus's sexuality was not separate from his sovereignty, it was an extension of it. Every seduction, every rape, and every illicit union was an act of colonial expansion, a way to weave his divine DNA into the fabric of the mortal world, thereby creating a buffer zone of demigods and heroes who would serve as the guardians of his order. Yet, for the women and men who caught the eye of the Thunderer, the attention of the god was rarely a blessing. It was a catastrophe that shattered lives and invited the wrath of the one entity who dared to oppose Zeus, his wife and sister, Hera. Hera, the Queen of Heaven, presided over marriage and fidelity. Her existence was a tragic paradox. She was the guardian of the sanctity of marriage, while being trapped in the most dysfunctional marriage in cosmic history. Powerless to punish Zeus directly, for his strength was absolute, she redirected her fury onto the victims and their offspring. This dynamic created a landscape of fear where mortal women were crushed between the unstoppable lust of the king and the immovable hatred of the queen. The methods Zeus employed to satisfy his desires reveal a deity who viewed consent as irrelevant and deception as a standard tool of courtship. He rarely appeared in his true divine form, knowing his raw glory was too much for mortal eyes. Instead, he became the master of shape-shifting, transforming into animals or elements that would lower the defenses of his prey.
The story of Europa is a prime example of this insidious charm. Europa, a Phoenician princess, was gathering flowers by the sea when Zeus approached her not as a king, but as a white bull, gentle, magnificent, and smelling of saffron. Charmed by the beast's docility, she climbed onto its back. In an instant, the gentle facade vanished. The bull plunged into the sea, swimming with terrifying speed to the island of Crete. There, beneath the plane trees that would never shed their leaves again in memory of the event, Zeus revealed himself and overpowered her. This union did not just ruin a princess, it birthed a continent, Europe, and the line of kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, that would define Cretan civilization. It was an act of violence that founded a civilization.
Even more disturbing is the seduction of Leda, the queen of Sparta. In this myth, Zeus transformed himself into a swan, feigning distress to seek refuge in her arms, or, in darker interpretations, to ambush her by the river Eurotas. The imagery of the white swan is stark and beautiful, but the reality is brutal. From this union, Leda laid eggs, hatching children who would alter the course of history. Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and Clytemnestra, the woman who would murder Agamemnon. Here, Zeus's lust planted the seeds for the Trojan War, proving that his bedroom antics were inextricably linked to the geopolitical fate of the ancient world. The tragedy of Io showcases the full horror of the divine triangle between Zeus, the victim, and Hera. Io, a priestess of Hera, was seduced by Zeus under the cover of a thick, unnatural cloud he summoned to hide his infidelity from the heavens. When Hera, suspicious of the sudden darkness, descended to investigate, Zeus panic-transformed Io into a white heifer. Hera, seeing through the ruse but playing along, asked for the cow as a gift. Zeus, trapped by social convention, handed his lover over. Io's life became a waking nightmare, stripped of her humanity, unable to speak, and guarded by the 100-eyed giant Argus Panoptis. Even after Hermes assassinated Argus, Hera sent a gadfly to sting the heifer relentlessly, driving Io mad as she wandered across continents. Her suffering was prolonged and agonizing, a pawn sacrificed in a domestic dispute between gods. However, not all of Zeus's affairs were non-consensual or deceitful. Some were lessons in the lethal incompatibility of mortal and divine natures. The story of Semele is a cautionary tale of ambition. Semele, a Theban princess, was Zeus's lover and became pregnant with Dionysus. Hera, in disguise, planted a seed of doubt in Semele's mind. How did she know her lover was truly the king of gods? Semele demanded that Zeus swear an unbreakable oath on the river Styx to grant her one wish. Bound by the oath, Zeus watched in horror as she asked to see him in his true Olympian form. He tried to dissuade her, but she insisted. When he revealed his true nature, a being of pure energy, lightning, and cosmic fire, Semele was instantly incinerated. Her mortal frame could not withstand the radiation of divinity. Zeus, in a desperate act of preservation, snatched the fetal Dionysus from her burning womb and sewed the baby into his own thigh until he was ready to be born. This myth underscores a terrifying truth. The gods are dangerous not just when they are angry, but simply by virtue of being.
Nor was Zeus's desire limited to women.
The abduction of Ganymede, the young prince of Troy, introduces pederasty into the divine profile, reflecting the social norms of the Greek elite, but elevating it to a cosmic scale. Zeus, enraptured by the boy's beauty, transformed into a giant eagle and snatched him from the plains of Troad, carrying him to Olympus to serve as the divine cupbearer. While Ganymede was granted immortality, he was essentially a trophy, eternally young and eternally serving, stripped of his earthly future to pour wine for his captor. But why? Why this endless parade of conquests? While lust was the driver, the destination was strategic survival. The prophecy of the Gigantomachy stated that the giants, those earth-born horrors, could only be killed if a god and a mortal fought together. The gods were powerful, but they needed a mortal agent to deliver the killing blow. Zeus was not just having sex, he was breeding an army. He was creating the golden generation of heroes. The culmination of this genetic project was Heracles. Zeus needed the ultimate warrior, so he lengthened the night to 3 times its normal duration to conceive him with Alcmene. Heracles was designed to be the shield of Olympus. His life was a testament to the success of Zeus's strategy. It was Heracles whose poisoned arrows finally felled the giants, saving the gods from destruction. Perseus, another son, slew Medusa and the Kraken. These heroes were the antibodies of the cosmos, roaming the earth to slay monsters that threatened civilization. Thus, we are left with a complex, uncomfortable picture of the King of Olympus. He was a serial rapist and a philanderer who caused immeasurable pain to his victims and his wife. Yet, in the ruthless calculus of mythology, his libido was the engine of survival. Without his affairs, there would be no Helen, no Dionysus, no Minos, and, crucially, no Heracles. The monsters would have won. Zeus's lust was, in his own mind, a necessary evil, a projection of power that ensured the sky would always rule over the earth, regardless of the collateral damage left in the bedrooms of mortals. If the wars with the Titans and giants defined Zeus's relationship with the divine, his conflict with Prometheus defined his relationship with the mortal. To understand Zeus's posture toward humanity, we must discard the modern notion of a benevolent father figure. In the early days of his reign, Zeus viewed humanity not as beloved children, but as a troublesome, wretched labor force, creatures of mud and clay who existed solely to worship and offer sacrifice. He was a jealous god, hoarding the secrets of civilization within the halls of Olympus, keeping mankind in a state of cold, ignorant darkness. He feared that if these ephemeral creatures were given the tools of power, they might eventually challenge the gods, just as the gods had challenged the Titans. The catalyst for this cosmic tension was the Titan Prometheus, whose name means foresight, and who dared to envision a humanity elevated above the status of shivering beasts. The conflict began not with a war, but with a meal. At Mycenae, gods and mortals gathered to determine how sacrifices should be divided. Prometheus, acting as the champion of mankind, devised a trick. He butchered a great ox and created 2 piles, one containing the succulent meat hidden beneath a layer of repulsive stomach lining, and the other containing bare bones covered in appetizing, glistening fat. He invited Zeus to choose his portion. The king of gods, perhaps deceived or perhaps playing along to justify his future wrath, chose the pile of fat and bones. When he stripped away the fat to reveal the dry bones underneath, his fury was instantaneous. From that day forth, men would keep the meat for themselves, burning only the bones for the gods, a perpetual reminder of the deception.
In retaliation, Zeus played a card of devastating cruelty. He did not strike them with lightning, he simply withheld fire. Without fire, humanity was doomed to a slow extinction, unable to cook food, forge tools, or keep the night terrors at bay. It was a sentence of enforced stagnation. Prometheus, unable to bear the suffering of his creations, climbed Mount Olympus in secret. He stole a spark of the celestial fire hidden inside the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant and brought it down to earth. This was not merely a transfer of heat, it was the transfer of technology, culture, and civilization. Suddenly, the darkness of the mortal world was illuminated by the orange glow of hearths and forges. Zeus looked down from his high throne and saw the twinkling lights of human progress spreading across the plains like a virus, and he knew his monopoly on power had been breached. The punishment Zeus devised for Prometheus is one of the most visceral and enduring images in all of mythology, a testament to the limitless creativity of divine cruelty. He did not kill the Titan, he wanted him to suffer eternally as a living monument to the cost of disobedience. Prometheus was chained to a crag in the Caucasus Mountains, exposed to the blistering sun and the freezing winds. Every day, a giant eagle, the Aetos caucasios, born of monsters, descended upon him. The bird would tear open the Titan's flesh and feast upon his liver, the organ the Greeks believed to be the seat of human emotion and soul. Because Prometheus was immortal, his liver regenerated every night, only to be eaten again the next morning. It was a cycle of agony without end, a physical manifestation of the psychological torture Zeus wished to inflict. The intellect that dared to help man was now being consumed by the brute force of nature. But Zeus's vengeance was binary. He had punished the thief, and now he had to punish the receivers of the stolen goods. He commissioned Hephaestus to craft a being of exquisite beauty, a beautiful evil, designed to be a poison pill for humanity. Her name was Pandora, all-gifted. Every god bestowed a gift upon her. Aphrodite gave her desire, Hermes gave her deceit, and Athena gave her craftsmanship. Zeus sent her down to earth, not with a weapon, but with a jar, mistranslated later as a box. When Pandora, driven by curiosity, opened the lid, she did not release demons in the literal sense. She released the hardships that define the human condition: toil, sickness, old age, and vice. Before this moment, men lived without suffering. Now they were plagued by the very burdens that make life a struggle. Only Olympus remained trapped inside the rim of the jar, a cruel mercy that allows humans to endure the torment Zeus had unleashed. Yet, even with a suffering humanity, Zeus was not satisfied. The degradation of mankind reached its nadir in the court of King Lycaon of Arcadia. To test the king's piety, Zeus visited him in disguise. Lycaon, a man of profound wickedness, attempted to serve the god a dish made of human flesh, the roasted remains of his own son or a captive, to see if the deity was truly all-knowing. The revulsion Zeus felt was absolute. He overturned the table in a rage, transforming Lycaon into a wolf, the first werewolf, reflecting his savage nature. But the incident convinced Zeus of a darker truth: humanity was irredeemable. The experiment had failed. He decided to wipe the slate clean. With the help of his brother Poseidon, Zeus unleashed the deluge. He opened the sluice gates of the sky and commanded the oceans to rise.
The world was swallowed by water, cities were crushed, forests were drowned, and the screams of the dying were silenced by the roaring waves. It was an act of total obliteration, intended to return the earth to its primal, watery state. Only two mortals, Deucalion, son of Prometheus, and Pyrrha, daughter of Pyrrha, and Pandora, survived by building a chest warned by the foresight of the tortured Titan. When the waters receded, leaving a silent, mud-caked world, Zeus allowed these two survivors to repopulate the earth by throwing the bones of their mother, rocks of Mother Earth, behind them, which transformed into a new race of stone-hardened men and women, a tougher, more enduring humanity, better suited to survive the harsh rule of the Olympian order. This era reveals the most terrifying aspect of Zeus. He is not a god who loves humanity unconditionally. He is a god who demands order and submission. He gave us laws, yes, but he also gave us the struggle for existence. He is the reason we have fire, but also the reason we have to work for it. In the eyes of Zeus, humanity is a dangerous variable that must be constantly managed, pruned, and occasionally culled to ensure that the gap between the mortal and the divine remains forever unbridged.
No king rules forever, not even the King of Heaven. The fires that burned for millennia on the altars of Mount Lycaon and Olympia eventually flickered and died, extinguished not by the waters of a deluge, but by the tides of history. As the classical world gave way to the relentless march of time, the supremacy of Zeus was challenged by a force he could not strike down with lightning. A new faith rising from the east. The transition was gradual, yet absolute. The Roman Empire initially absorbed him, rebranding the cloud-gatherer as Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest. In Rome, he became less of a chaotic, philandering individual and more of a stern, state-sponsored symbol of republican duty and imperial authority. But even Jupiter could not withstand the cultural shift towards monotheism. In the 4th century A.D., when Emperor Theodosius I banned pagan cults and silenced the Oracle of Delphi, the active worship of Zeus effectively ended. The great gold and ivory statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was lost to fire and destruction, leaving behind only the empty footprint of a god who once held the world in his palm. However, gods do not die, they evolve. Zeus did not vanish into the ether, he was absorbed into the cultural DNA of the West. If you look closely at the Renaissance depictions of the Christian God the Father, the white-bearded, muscular patriarch floating in the clouds of the Sistine Chapel, you are looking at the visual ghost of Zeus. The iconography of supreme power, the aesthetics of divine wrath and fatherly judgment were seamlessly transferred from the Olympian king to the new theology. He survives in the names of the planets, in the days of the week, and in the very language of law and order we use today. From a modern psychological perspective, specifically through the lens of Carl Jung, Zeus is the ultimate manifestation of the father archetype, a figure representing protection, authority, and structure, but also casting a long, terrifying shadow of tyranny and repression. He embodies the complex relationship humanity has with power itself. We crave the order Zeus brings, the safety of laws, the predictability of the seasons, but we resent the arbitrary nature of his control. He is the CEO who builds the company, but rules it with fear. He is the politician who secures peace, but indulges in corruption. Zeus remains compelling to us because he is not a distant, perfect abstraction of goodness. He is shockingly, uncomfortably human. He is a mirror of our own grandiosity, our lust, our jealousy, and our paranoia, blown up to a cosmic scale.
In today's pop culture, the Thunder King has found a new life, often depicted with a nuance that the ancient poets would have recognized. In movies like Clash of the Titans or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he is often the distant, flawed patriarch. In video games like God of War, he is the ultimate antagonist, the embodiment of a cycle of abuse that must be violently broken by the next generation. We have stripped him of his divinity, but we have kept his character. He serves as a reminder that power, unchecked and eternal, inevitably corrupts. So how do we judge the son of Cronus? Was he the savior who freed the cosmos from the suffocating grip of the Titans and established the rule of law? Or was he the paranoid despot who treated humanity as a disposable experiment and ruled through fear? The answer, like the god himself, is not singular. He is both the lightning that illuminates the dark and the storm that destroys the shelter. He is the terrifying necessity of order in a chaotic universe. As we look up at the stormy sky, even in our modern scientific age, the roll of thunder still commands a primal respect, a fleeting moment where we remember the time when the world was young and a king sat on the mountain, watching us. Thank you for joining us on this odyssey through the age of myths. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Zeus, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Let us know in the comments, which Olympian do you want us to analyze next? The wise Athena, the gloomy Hades, or the vengeful Hera? Until then, keep your eyes on the skies.